And tonight I take you finally into the Order of the Stick. 2 weeks ago, when I did the genre savvy TV trope, I definitely told you this was coming, and that's because TV tropes has a lot to do with my love of this. I've been very hesitant over the last year to do this because the writer's not too happy with people using his artwork. Hopefully he's understanding in what fair use is as I give you the review. And welcome back to the heart of the stories we tell. I'm Rob the host, and this is another look deep into what makes a story, a theory on storytelling by a storyteller who believes that every story has merit. And tonight's episode is Richard Burlow's The Order of the Stick. What is the Order of the Stick? Well, it's a stick-based comic that has started out as a D&D series. And for those of you that don't know Dungeons & Dragons, that's a fantasy role-playing game. I can't believe anyone doesn't know about Gary Gygax creating it. And you can find the website for this particular webcomic, Giant in the Playground. Now, before we go any further, I want to say this started off as a joke of the day strip, but it became so much more. Nowadays, it's got books, it's got games, you name it. In fact, I'm going to go so far out there as to say this is the closest story I have to one that I would give mythical metal rating to. And you know why? Because this one's already guaranteed to be platinum and it's not even over yet. Yeah, every now and again we get bogged down in a joke that if you didn't know 3rd edition D&D, you probably wouldn't get, or at least D&D in general. But beyond those jokes, there is a story that's totally worth exploring. In fact, this is almost a master thesis on what a fantasy story should be. It's timely, it's definitely innovative, and it does it all while maintaining a PG rating most of the time. It's at the same time as complex and as innovative as Game of Thrones, but it's not given a third of the respect. And you know what? I think that an HBO series on this would be amazing. But that's enough gushing for now. Let's throw up my normal warning because this multiple-year-old story may not be over, but there be spoilers ahead. So once again, it's stop. Spoiler time. And we're going to get started where we always do. The setting. So I don't have a name for the stick Earth, but, well, it's kind of just Earth. And it's just the world that the gods created. Well, the second world. More on that later. Let's get into the characters. The Order itself is a parody on the 6-man team of most D&D games, although I'll be honest, I'm more experienced with the 5-man band myself. It's led by Roy Greenhilt, the founder of the Order. He's a fighter, which means that he's your classic warrior. He's smart, he's fast, he's tough. And you know what? He kicks serious ass. In fact, I'd have to say, of all the characters, he very much is one of my favorites. And he's the straight man for most of the jokes, but at the same time, he's the one pushing the main plot. It's his point of view we follow a lot. And then there's Elon, and Elon's the other end of the Order. He's the comic relief. He's the bard. And he's relatively useless at the beginning of the story, but he comes into his own. A little bit of spellcasting, a little bit of knowledge of different lores, and he's the character that is genre savvy. So he gets to say things like, wait, a 1 in a million chance is going to happen every time. Where he's good-natured and a bit of a doofus, and Roy is a straight-up straight man, Haley, Elon's girlfriend and Roy's second-in-command, is none of those things. She's chaotic good-ish, and mostly she starts off as in it just for the money. Now, as the story becomes more and more epic, we do get a lot more character development with Haley than we do with most characters. She obviously has the first arc of the story. She is the one that learns and grows and has some really great funny moments. She's a thief in D&D terms. And then we have that problem player, the one everyone dreads at a D&D table. Balkir, the halfling ranger, who sucks at doing everything that a ranger's supposed to do, except fight. He is a little murder hobo. You want to know what a murder hobo is? I'll cover that another time. He basically is evil, and Roy even at multiple points says, hey look, I just point him in the right direction, so the people he kills, he's going to kill people anyway. At least this way he have him pointed at the good targets. Everyone gets their moment to shine in this story, but Valkyr's is an interesting one, because it's all about fake character development. We'll talk about that in a minute. But finally there's Thhe, Verusivus. And well, we don't even know if Verusivus is a guy or a girl, and that's a running joke in the team. They are the... I'm just going to say she. I personally believe that Thhe is a woman. Thhe is pretty powerful by the point in the story we are now. But even when she started off, being the wizard of the group, she has some of the most versatile things, and the Evard's penetrating tendrils is one of the greatest jokes that still kind of makes me shiver. Where Elon and Roy are definitely good, and Haley is goodish, and Balkir's just outright evil. Thhe, on the other hand, Thhe is more neutral. Thhe is that person who's looking for a reason, and finds one when she sells her soul. And then we have the other caster of the group, Mr. Thunderspear, Durkin. Durkin is awesome, but he's also the most flat of the characters. He's about to get a big story arc right now in the comics, so I don't want to go into too much about him, but he's the cleric of the party, which basically means a lot of the time his role comes into being a backup fighter for Roy and healing everyone. His healing spells allow them to keep going in each dungeon as things get wrong. But then there are the antagonists. Every bit as important as our heroes are our villains. There's quite a few, but I'm going to name the three big ones. We're going to start with Zycon the Lich. He is an all-powerful spellcaster. He can single-handedly take on the whole order on his own. In fact, he does multiple times. He's what we call a sorcerer in old D&D 3.5 talk, meaning he's not the brightest person, but he has innate spell-like abilities. They even make a joke that he's kind of like an X-Men character, more a mutant than a wizard. Then we have his trusted companion. Well, more like his not-so-trusted companion. A goblin whose name we've never actually learned. We just call him Red Cloak. He is the high priest of the god of the goblins, the Dark One. And his whole goal here is to either A, take control of this thing called the Snarl to blackmail the other gods, or B, worst case scenario, destroy the whole world, everyone, even his goblins, so that when the next world gets made, goblins will get a fairer shake. At the end of the day, this is one of the most interesting parts. This villain is fighting for fair play. He very much is against racism, and the fact is that goblins are at the bottom of the racism totem pole. It's kind of weird that we have the guy fighting against racism as our villain. And then there's the monster in the darkness, another great concept. Early, when it was just a joke, he was in the shadow until he could have a big dramatic reveal. But when people started piecing together and trying to figure out exactly who or what it really is, Rich just put the thumb down and said, okay, you know what? I'm not telling you till the end of the story. And it's been a going mystery for, 10, 12 years now? What is the monster in the darkness? Well, I'll tell you what he is. O'Toole says it best. He's a good man. Innocent, childlike, and not really understanding what's going on more often than not. The monster in the darkness is a pawn of Team Bad Guy. And as long as the bad guys keep telling him, hey, no, we're your friends, we're helping you, he helps them. But he's already started to question exactly what that means. And as such, he is one of the really interesting things that happens when you start really deconstructing good guys and bad guys. And then that goes to the plot. Excuse me as I just say it's complicated. We got flashbacks. In fact, we have two prequels, Origin of PCs and Start of Darkness. Start of Darkness is actually a trope namer for TV tropes, because it's the origin of the villains. Both of these are available as trade paperbacks for sale. Both of them are done in black and white, and neither of them are directly referenced in the online comic, although it does make reading the comic more interesting. They're not the only flashbacks we have. Every once in a while, each character gets their own. Some just for comic relief, others for good reason. But for the most part, this is a pretty linear story. It's epic high fantasy, where we have warriors jumping into battle against liches who are riding on the back of undead dragons. Yeah, I didn't make that up. But it's also romance and how the characters interact, and a pretty important set of themes, and we'll get to that. But in general, it's the story of the Order trying to save the world. Like I said, it didn't start off as the most epically badass story ever. It started off as a series of jokes. So quick warning, this isn't in the first 100 strips. What it is there's this creature called the Snarl, and he destroyed the world once, and we're already on World 2. And now, there was an order of the Scribble, that found out about it, and found out that there were small holes in reality and the snarl was going to get out. So they built these gates to protect reality and entered into a pact with the gods that the gods wouldn't let the snarl destroy the world. Except here's the problem. Those gates could be opened because they're not just seals, they're gates. When the gods made this world, they made it as a prison for the snarl. Except not all the gods were in on it, because the Dark One, the Goblin God, came later. So he entered into a plan. He wanted to use the snarl as a weapon against the other gods, at least as a threat, so that he could help get goblins to be in the same level as humans. However, it didn't work. He needed a person, a high priest, and that's where Red Cloak comes in. But Red Cloak wasn't really powerful enough. But that's okay, because Red Cloak found a human sorcerer who was interested in just blowing up the world, or doing crazy stuff, or just killing people, and he teamed up with him. It was supposed to be a partnership, but that person became Zycon the Lich, and once he became Zycon the Lich, there was no holding him back. He's taken over Team Evil, and he's using it for his own goals, but Red Cloak has a few tricks up his sleeve, too. You'll have to read to find out more. So whose point of view are we following? Realistically, it depends on the individual storyline, but for the most part we're following the order, and I'd say Roy is our primary protagonist. Yeah, there are flashbacks in Start of Darkness, and Red Cloak gets a lot of evil themes, but for the most part, it's the order. And you could write a book about the themes and symbolism here in this story. Rich regularly puts anachronisms, things that are out of place, as a joke or a pot shot at something going on in the real world, or just to be able to make it more relatable. Those moments that bring us out of the story normally actually strengthen most of the themes in the story itself. And what are some of these themes? Well, just at its root, good and evil is a pretty good one just for any heroic story, but this one takes it on a whole different level. It asks questions like, if someone evil does something good, is that a good deed? Is it if they only did it for a selfish reason? What if someone that was relatively good or neutral did something evil, but did it for a good cause? What if someone killed someone, but the person was a bad guy that got killed? Does that change whether it was a good guy or a bad guy doing the killing? And what about greed? Oh, greed is another good one they play with a lot. If everything you do is for money, does that make you greedy? What if you need that money for a reason? What if you're a thief because your father's sick and in the hospital? You know, Jean Valjean got asked that question. Would you steal a loaf of bread rather than to see your niece and nephew die of hunger? Just stealing a piece of bread. But at the same time, we have, again, joke-a-day comic stuff. And then there's even more. Here's a question for you. If someone manipulates good people into doing good things, but does so by being a bad person, are they good or bad? And try this one on for size. If you knew for absolute sure that something bad was happening, but you swore an oath not to get involved unless it directly affected you, but you saw other people were in danger because of it, and you interfered, you obviously broke your oath. What does that make you? You know, the person who helped. And it also has to do with ties of friendship. Who do you trust? Do you trust your best friend? Do you trust the enemy of your enemy? Do you trust the people you work with? And what happens when that trust gets tested? And at the end of the day, can you overcome being a little different than someone else, if it means working with them? Can you bring the world together, or are you going to tear the world apart? And that doesn't even begin to get into the fact that the snarl might not even be real. It might all be some sort of big lie. This is a complex story. I said from the beginning that this story is something that all writers should study, and it is. Richard Burlow has created an entire level of art that's risen above just being an online comic. He's doing massive in-depth studies into what it means to be a person, what it means to be good, what it means to be evil, in a way that, I mean, you could write a psychological textbook. There are characters that only show up for a few pages of strip and still manage to make huge strides in what we think of as good and evil. So the good is so numerous on this that I couldn't even begin to list it. The character development, the plotting, the pacing, the themes, the symbolism, all of it is good. The bad, well, the bad is that it's not going to be seen by that many people. And there are some of the older things that just would fall through the cracks. People aren't going to understand it. Jokes that are going to fall flat because we're talking about a game system that's been out of print as long as it was in print. And the ugly is how long the story's taking. Everyone knows I give George Martin the shit, and admittedly, Richard Burlow has not been writing as long, but he also hasn't written as much. And at the end of the day, sometimes we go weeks or months without updates to this comic. And I sit there and I go, ugh, it's such a good story. I want to know how it ends. Especially if you want insight into just about any fantasy story, or you just want to read a new good one, I cannot recommend enough Order of the Stick. Just go to that Giant in the Playground address and click on it and take a look at it. Again, depending on how much of a D&D fan you are, you might need to skip through some of the beginning ones. But those are my thoughts. I'd love to hear yours. Have you read Order of the Stick? Do you think that I'm praising it too much? This isn't a paid advertisement at all, but I have to say it certainly felt like one by the end. I'm sure the creators of 3rd edition D&D would be proud, and I'm sure that so would Gary Gygax, that this story was inspired by it, but at the same time moved beyond it. But at the same time, it's the end of the video, and it's time for me to ask you to like and share, and of course subscribe. Click that little alert button if you haven't already, because I'm trying to build a community here. And I really hope that we can talk about all sorts of stories, because now that you've seen my idea of what an almost perfect one is, I'd love to hear from you as well. But for now, I hope you have a good night, and thanks for watching and enjoying as we walk through the heart of the stories we tell.